There's 106 members for anybody who's curious about that exact number. Does the clerk attest to the return of the warrant? Yes, she does. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Normally we'd begin with some ceremonies that have become part of our meetings. However, while my goal is to return to as normal a meeting protocol as possible, I'm still going to err on the side of caution and reserve our time for discussion and debate on the essential articles to possibly limit the length of the meeting. However, I do not intend to really limit debate today. Hopefully the fall will return to some semblance of what I'm going to term the new normal, whatever that may be. So without further ado, to my left, Town Council Attorney Lauren Goldberg, Town Administrator Jim Johnson, and Chairman of the Select Board Ben Barrett. To my right, the FinCom Chair Mark Trudell and Vice Chair Denny Crowley. We have some newly elected members by caucus. We have in Precinct 1, Catherine Mathey. Catherine, get a little wave. There she is. In Precinct 6, we have Mariah Bools, and I probably messed up the last name, but I think I got the first one right. And we also have Jennifer Lee in Precinct 6. Thank you, and welcome. Town meeting doesn't happen without the efforts of many, many people. Short and sweet, just thanks to each and every one of you. You know who you are. Thank you. Before I review the procedural issues for this meeting, I'm going to review the health and safety guidance from the Director of Public Health, Melissa Berneri, that she passed off to me. She's handling the hazardous waste today. I'd like to remind everyone the importance of maintaining both a health and safety environment throughout today's event. It's a nice blustery spring day, as we saw, and everyone should remain cognizant of the importance still of sun protection and drinking water to stay hydrated over the next few hours. Please be mindful of your surroundings and be neighborly to those around you. And emergency responders are on site and located throughout the field if anybody should require medical attention. Given the fact that everyone is sitting 15 feet away from one another, we are not requiring you to wear a mask throughout the entire meeting. That being said, masks should be worn anytime you cannot maintain 6 feet of separation from others while you're moving around. We ask you adhere to this request and be courteous to those around you. You all know the restrooms are located as you enter the field near the snack building. Please adhere to protocols there. I believe it's just no more than 2 in the bathroom when you go in. If you decide you'd like to make a comment, come down to one of the 4 microphones down front, or is it 3 this time? Nope, 4. When it's time to do so, please walk towards the podium closest to your area to avoid walking past, others as best you can. If you can't maintain social distancing, wear a mask. And as you see, I don't know if there's markings by them this time. There's not. Just use your eyeball and maintain 3 feet from individuals in line. Try to keep the queues down to 2 or 3 people. We can wait for you to come up if you have comments. You should not touch the microphone. There's a town representative at each position, and they'll adjust them and properly sanitize them in between speakers. Onto the specific procedural rules. As a reminder, all motions were due to me yesterday. When you are recognized to speak, please identify yourself by name and precinct. Even if I call you by name, it's even more difficult with hats and sunglasses and masks for me to recognize some of you. Address your remarks to the moderator. If you are asking a question, I will ask the appropriate official for a response. Primary response, as we've done previously, primary sponsors will have 5 minutes to present their article, and all other members who wish to speak on an article will be limited to 3 members. I ask there be no repeat speakers unless you have new information to offer. Voice voting will be the primary method of voting. We'll be using the red and green voting cards you all should have been given when you came in during voice voting. Per usual, if I'm unable to call a voice vote, we'll go to a standing vote. We have 6 tellers today. On my left, not the left, They pointed that out to me. There's Diane Culhane, Virginia Conley. In the center, we have John Lee and Christina Blau. And on my right, we have Susan Lawson and Allie Hamilton. Thank you for volunteering, tellers. If there is a standing vote, I will count the tellers first by a show of hands. The tellers will then count the standing vote, the ayes first, and then the noes. Tellers shall coordinate their counts and announce the vote from the microphone, and the town clerk and I will independently tally to determine the quantum of vote has been met. A couple of things I want to point out. Normally we'd have a rules committee caucus in the spring. Because of the social distancing, I've asked the town clerk to set those up through Zoom meetings working with Mike Donovan. So they'll be reaching out to each precinct to have a caucus for you to select your rules committee member. This fall, we also have the bylaws committee that is coming due. It's in 5-year intervals, and as I am, finishing up my 4th year, I figure it's time to forward. If you want, you can review the charter. There's a little blurb in there about it, but basically 5 years to review any revisions or recodifications, and then present to the next annual fall town meeting, and then the committee's discharged upon the giving of their report. So it's an honor for me to serve as the town moderator. I assure you this and all town meetings will be run as efficiently and as fairly as possible. As you know, I have no vote that would influence the outcome of any particular article. Are there any questions or comments? At this point, I have a preliminary motion and a second from the Finance Committee to waive the reading of the warrant. Questions or comments? There being none, the Finance Committee's motion requires a simple majority. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your green card. Sorry, you got to remember that one. All those opposed, and raise your red card. It is a vote. I have another properly second motion that all motions of the Finance Committee be the main motion. Questions or comments? There being none, this also requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your green card and say aye. All those opposed, raise your red card and say nay. It is a favorable vote. We'll now proceed to Article 1, a general article that remained open throughout the meeting. In Article 1, it is moved that the town will hear and act on the report of any committee, or to choose any committee the town think proper and transact any other business that may legally come before the town. At this time, we have a presentation for the middle school. Where is, oh, there we are. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nancy Galavian from the school committee, and with me is Mark Breen, another school committee member and the chair of the school building committee. Hopefully you've already heard a great deal about the facts related to the middle school project that we've been working on for about 5 years. There's a great deal of information available on the front page of the Walpole Public Schools website at walpole.k12.ma.us. In the fall, this body will be presented with developing details and plenty of time to digest it before being asked to vote at the fall town meeting. In preparation for that, and especially for those RTMs who may not have attended any of the community forums, we just want to share a little bit of information today. As Walpole grew in the late 90s, the increase in school population was served by adding to Walpole High School and opening a 4th elementary school with the purchase of the Elm Street property. At that time, the middle school saw crowding relief when the decision was made to change it from grades 5 through 8 to grades 6 through 8. Now, 20 years later, those buildings have reached or about to reach their 60th birthdays, and we need to address both their future from both the systems and educational perspectives. Massachusetts has a program funded by the state sales tax that cost shares school construction projects with communities, and this is the process we began to plan for over 6 years ago. After waiting 3 years, Walpole was accepted into this MSBA program, and in 2018, the number of people hours that has been invested has increased steadily. 2 years ago, Springtown meeting approved $1.5 million towards this project. It was what was needed to get us to the point where we will be able to present the voters and this body with designs completed to the 25% point, along with a professional cost estimate, hopefully by early September. Over the last year, school committee evaluated the pros and cons of proceeding with 2 separate or 1 combined middle school, and concluded that both from an educational and financial point of view, the pros of combining outweighed the cons. So in December, the decision was made to narrow down the multiple options for consideration. The project team we are working with is the same one that managed the police, fire, and council on aging buildings in Walpole. And along with the architect, they've given us some preliminary estimated cost ranges so far. At this point, the total cost is projected to be about $116 million. The expected state reimbursement is projected to be $35 million. And the 30-year cost to the average taxpayer is projected to be around $450 per year. Walpole will submit the required documentation in early July to MSBA, and we expect to hear back from them soon after their August 25th board meeting. At that point, we will have a final project cost and a firm commitment for state funding. I know that I speak for my colleagues when I say we have taken very seriously the responsibility of spending taxpayer funding wisely. As some of you know, the Walpole Public Schools operates below the state average and below the average of local towns nearby every year. We have approached this project with the same respect for the taxpayer, but make no mistake, we recognize this is a major investment for both the town and the taxpayers, and we think that this investment will benefit our community for many, many years to come. That's all I've got, but my friend Mark Breen is good at closing these things out, so here's Mark.
Thank you, Nancy. Mark Breen, Precinct 2, School Committee and School Building Committee. I just have a few remarks. Especially in this era of COVID, people don't have the opportunity to talk about these things. It's just that much more difficult. So we strongly encourage you to go to the website, the school website, and there are QR codes about and around here, and educate yourself as much as you can about the project. We have a community forum. The next community forum is in June, and it's interesting, as these have proceeded, they've been better attended, which is good, and there'll be more coming after that. And most importantly, at least for today, members of the school committee and perhaps school administration will be available after the meeting. We'll be standing about and around over there to answer any questions and, just get to meet people and hopefully get the ball rolling in terms of public participation on this project. So I thank you very much, and good day.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Mr. Breen.
How's that?
Nailed it. We'll now move on to the consent agenda. Our rules provide for the moderator to make use of a consent agenda comprised of articles which would generate no apparent controversy and could be properly voted on as one unit without debate. The consent agenda with the article numbers and the Finance Committee vote listed was included in your packet delivered a couple of weeks ago. I'll read the article numbers and a brief description now. If any member objects to the inclusion of any article in the consent agenda, that article will be removed and acted upon separately in its normal course of the warrant. Article 4, Personnel Board Monies, Finance Committee vote, no action, 14-0-0. Mr. Moraski, you'd like that pulled? Okay, Article 4 will be removed from the consent agenda. Article 7, the fiscal year 20 Water Enterprise Fund Transfer, Finance Committee vote, no action, 12-0-1. Article 11, fiscal year 21 Snow and Ice Deficit, Finance Committee vote, no action, 14-0-0. Article 14, prior year's unpaid bills, Finance Committee vote, no action, 14-0-0. Okay, so we'll go with the consent agenda for Articles 7, 11, and 14. Any further questions or comments? There being none, a simple majority vote is needed. All those in favor, please raise your green card and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no. It is a favorable vote. Thank you, folks. Yes. Article 2, this motion is from the petition of the Personnel Board. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to approve the amendments to the personnel bylaws as recommended by the Personnel Board and found on file in the office of the clerk. Mr. Trudeau, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action, 12-1-1.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Barrett, Board of Selectmen vote.
The Select Board voted 4-1-0, favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Any questions or comments with respect to Article 2? There being none, this requires, sorry? Am I missing? Oh, come on down, Joe.
Hi, Joe Kelly, Precinct 7.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, fine.
I have a comment on this. I hope I don't offend anybody. That's not my intentions here. But I find this article to be more important than it appears. On a town level, in the divisiveness of the country and everything that's going on, we're celebrating here, and we're paying people to be idle. Yet in 1865, when this was first proposed in Galveston, Texas, the slaves were told that they would not be paid to be idle. And I think we're taking a lot of resources that could be used to unite the country, and that this money should be better spent to unite people and be more positive. I think this is going to have an impact. I'd point out that this is not a federal holiday, it's a state holiday. And someday I would like to see the Civil War and the end of slavery be represented in the country as a whole. So as a state, I think we have an obligation, and more importantly as a town, to make sure that the country gets it right, that it would be used to unite the country and not further divide it. And I think that these resources, we should send the state a message that collectively the money that's going to be used could benefit ancestors of slave, unite the country, and I just think it's more important than it looks on the face of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Any further questions or comments? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your green card. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no. It is a vote. It is a favorable vote. Article 3, Personnel Salary Schedule. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to approve the new salary schedule as recommended by the Personnel Board and found on file in the office. This is a petition of the Personnel Board. Mr. Trudeau, the Finance Committee vote?
Sorry.
It'll come.
Finance Committee voted favorable action, 12-0-2.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett.
The Select Board voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Are there any questions or comments with regard to Article 3? Come on down, Mr. Moraski.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Moraski, Precinct 8. I just want to make a comment about Article 3. I'm going to vote in favor of it, but it is a comment. I had a resolution that was prepared. It was seconded by Mrs. Lawson. However, after discussion with you, Mr. Moderator, we decided to pull it. And I think that was the appropriate thing to do. But for town meeting's benefit, Mass General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 108, that pretty much creates the Personnel Board. It creates the personnel bylaws, the ability to have bylaws, and it creates a compensation plan, which is part of the bylaws. Now, I received the salary schedule. I had to go down to the town clerk's office to get it. I didn't have it in my packet. I don't know if the other members of town meeting had it or got it. It wasn't in the warrant, and usually that salary schedule is much more public, and I hope that in the future it remains public. But even though we have this ability to create our own bylaws, personnel bylaws, and personnel compensation plan, there are 3 sections in the state statute which allows the town to enter into individual employment contracts. And if anybody wants those references, I have them. It is in Chapter 41, Mass General Laws 41. Based upon, and there's about 6 positions that are that are exempt and allowed to be under individual employment contracts. And those are the 6 that you probably would guess. You know, fire chief, police chief, town administrator, treasurer, collector, assessor. But based on the information that recently surfaced and supplied to the Finance Committee, there appears to be more positions for which the Select Board has granted individual employment contracts. Now, I went to the town clerk's office to get them, and I did get a few of them. I still don't, based upon my review of Select Board minutes, I still don't think I have them all, and I may have to go back and see where the missing ones might be. But Town Council has basically provided an opinion on this subject to the Finance Committee. And among other things, I think what she said was that the Select Board has the power of contract. But as I read that power of contract, it seems to indicate that it's exempt for those contracts that are preempted by state statute. And the state statute that I mentioned that creates the Personnel Board, the plan, and the compensation plan, you know, certainly, to me, prevents the power of contract. Not only that, Section 4-3C, powers and duties of the town administrator, that basically indicates that while the town administrator shall fix the compensation of all town officers and employees appointed by him or her, it has to be done within the limits established by appropriations and the classification compensation plan adopted by town meeting. So the bottom line...
Mr. Moraski, please wrap up your comments,
Okay,
please.
so the bottom line with respect to the salary schedule, we're in the midst of some type of a jurisdictional issue. And who has jurisdiction over salaries? Who has jurisdiction over what positions get an individual employment contract? And my position right now is I think that town meeting is losing control over managing salaries. I think there's a disconnect between the salary schedule and individual employment contracts, and I think the individual employment contracts lack transparency. So just to wrap it up, I'm asking the Board of Selectmen to put a hold on doing any more individual employment contracts until the town meeting bylaw committee can meet in the fall and start a review of all of this and see to straighten it out. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Ms. Lawson?
Lawson, Precinct 2, and member of Finance Committee. I joined with Joe in this resolution, and I understand why it's being postponed, and that's fine. My concern is twofold. One, I discovered that there are a number of recently adopted individual employment contracts during the course of budget review at Finance Committee. And it was a surprise to me that certain positions have come off the salary schedule and basically been folded into individual contracts. My concern is procedure. I feel like there needs to be input from the Personnel Board, a closer review by Finance Committee, and then transparency about who is getting an individual employment contract and what's contained in them. So I'm not rising to express a concern over the substance of any of these contracts or the need for them, for that matter. My concern is with procedure. Who determines whether they're necessary, and furthermore, then what's in them? So I'm concerned that this be addressed and not slip through the cracks, and that's my purpose in speaking to town meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lawson. Any further questions or comments? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your green cards and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no. It is a favorable vote. Article 4, bear with me one sec, I gotta pull it out of the consent agenda. Article 4 is on personnel costs. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town take no action. Excuse me. This is a petition of the Personnel Board. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted no action, 14-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Barrett, Board of Selectmen vote.
The Select Board voted 5-0-0, no action.
Mr. Moraski.
Moraski, Precinct 8. Can we have the Personnel Board's vote on this article? They're the petitioners, and I'm assuming that for one reason or another, they're the ones who wanted this article on. Did they have a vote?
Mr. McGrath?
Mike McGrath, Precinct 3. Through you, Mr. Moderator, we voted 4-0-0 in favor of no action.
Thank you, Mr. McGrath.
Every year this article appears on the spring annual town meeting. And why do we continually put an article on the warrant for which no action is always recommended? I think maybe we have to, we're voting to raise and appropriate money to defray cost of any changes to the personnel bylaws. And those changes to the personnel bylaws are the new salary schedule in Article 3. The salary schedule is part of the bylaws. If we voted favorable action on Article 4, would we have to go through all the budgets and remove all the raises in order to put them in Article 4 under the jurisdiction of the personnel board, the personnel board? If the money is put in Article 4, the monies are earmarked just for the personnel board to distribute only for raises. If the money is put in the salary line of each and individual budget, then the money or any unexpended balance can be used for any purpose related to salaries. Now, it seems odd to me as I think about this, would we ever divide up $460,000 in reserve fund transfers into individual budgets to cover extraordinary or unforeseen expenditures for each department? I think the Finance Committee wouldn't want to see that. Or how about the $220,000 in the legal budget? Would we carve that up and put it into individual budgets? You know, the answer is obviously no. So I would like to have this article, fine for favorable action this year, but maybe next year I'd like to have the Finance Committee and the Personnel Board think about going back to what we used to do back in the 70s and 80s and put all the raises in one article for the Personnel Board to distribute. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I see it. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Mr. Trudell?
Yes, in the past, it was funded separately, but that was usually when the pay increases were not known at the time that the budget was being drafted, and the town was not sure of its revenue. And so that Article 4 was more of an after-fact, and Article 3 were after-fact items, because we were either up against what the state was going to give us for money versus what we had available for actual raises. And that was my understanding of why it used to be separate articles.
Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Mr. Trudell. Any further questions or comments? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority. All those in favor of no action, all those in favor of a no action, please say aye and raise your green cards. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no, nay. It is a unanimous vote. Article 5, the fiscal 2021, sorry folks, budget adjustment. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town transfer a sum of $170,000 to the fire department fiscal year 21 personnel line item from the following sources. The assessor's network. I'm not going to read out the amounts, folks. If somebody wants a specific amount, they range from $12,227.42 for a Ford F-350 van to projectors costs of $11 that were recaptured from the various articles that were appropriated. But there's the assessor's network, Memorial Pond Study, Bird School Security, the ladder truck, an ambulance replacement, port batteries and sea, security, projectors, unmarked cruisers, ponds, O&M manuals, dam inspection, stormwater, Memorial Pond dam maintenance, chain link fence repairs, a dump truck number 255, Ford F-350 truck with plow, and a Ford F-350 van. Total completed capital projects is $43,640.67, and free cash is $126,359.33. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action, 13-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Barrett, Board of Selectmen vote.
The Select Board voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Are there any questions or comments with regard to Article 5? Mr. O'Leary.
John O'Leary, Precinct 3. My question is, why aren't we taking funds from the ambulance fund rather than from free cash to supplement the needs?
Mr. Trudell.
We have appropriated in this year's budget money coming out of the ambulance fund to supplement the fire department budget, and we anticipate capital items being necessary coming out of the ambulance fund in the fall, and that's why we're using the available free cash now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Any other questions or comments with respect to Article 5? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your green card and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no. It is a unanimous vote. Article 6, the fiscal year 2022 budget. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town fix the salary and compensation for elected officials of the town as provided for by the general laws, Chapter 41, Section 108, for their services for the fiscal year commencing July 1, 2021, and that the town vote to appropriate the following sums for the operation of the municipal and school departments and incidental expenses of the town for fiscal year 2022, July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. And that the sum of $100,143,512 be raised from the following funding sources. Raise and appropriate from taxation, $97,283,678. Ambulance fund, $798,255. Sale of cemetery lots, $10,000. Water enterprise fund, $1,267,407. Sewer enterprise fund, $434,172. Overlay, $350,000. Again, for a total of $100,143,512. As I've done in the past, well, let me just get the Finance Committee and Board of Selectmen vote. Mr. Trudell?
Finance Committee voted favorable action, 14-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Barrett?
Select Board voted favorable action 5-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. So as I've done in the past, I'm going to read off the general government, so you should open your book. All these are in your warrant article. I'm going to help draw your attention more specifically to it. So it's right opposite the page with the graph for the funding sources in here. So these, I'm going to read off the totals per department rather than the individual underlying. So general government, for instance, includes many line items. So look through that. I'll pause to see if there's any hold. I would have expected you would have looked at this previously if you have a hold on something. But the total general government budget is $5,760,299. Does anybody wish to put a hold on the general government budget? Mr. Muraski? Town administration? Anything else, Mr. Muraski? Is that it? Any other hold, sorry, planning board? Any other holds on general government? Mr. O'Leary, thank you. Town accountant, thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Any others? Okay, on to public safety. Total public safety is $12,086,640. Do I have any holds on public safety? Yes? Police department? Could you say your name? I'm going to try to hear it. Thanks, Megan. Not wearing my glasses. Mr. O'Leary? Animal control. Folks, just as a reminder, if someone else has a hold on the police department, you should speak up because you can't piggyback on Ms. Ahigian. Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. That's why I thought of that. Thank you. Any other holds? Okay. Public education, $50,583,775. Any holds on public education? Thank you, Mr. Damish. And yes, there was. And which one? Schools. Thank you, Shannon. And Mr. O'Leary, which one? Tri-County. Any others? Okay, we're on to Public Works. $5,686,989. Anyone have a hold on Public Works? Mr. O'Leary, which one? Highway Division. Any others? Okay, Health and Human Services, $839,198. That's a way to get rid of a no vote, right? Sorry, folks. Okay, Culture and Recreation, $2,001,382. Mr. O'Leary, which one? Parks Department. Any others? Debt and interest, $4,187,900. Assessments and fringe benefits, $18,997,329. Okay, so we will go back now. Mr. Muraski for general government. Well, before I do that, anyone else just double checking? All right, Mr. Muraski, you have administration.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Muraski, Precinct 8. I'm going to combine these, try to kill two birds with one stone to save you some time. And I ask for your patience here.
I'm sorry, could the imposter please leave the microphone and have the next person arise? Sorry, Joe, I couldn't resist.
I know that. So I happened to be watching the Board of Selectmen meeting of April 20th. And the Select Board was discussing the charge and makeup of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. And they were talking about it in great detail, about the number of members that should be on it and the consulting firm that they were hiring. And I looked at the town administrator's budget and I thought maybe under expenses he must have some money in there for the consultant for the master plan. And what further confused me, Mr. Moderator, and I want to make sure of this because if that money is in there, You know, it probably should be with the planning board because Mass General Laws, Section 41, Section 81D, the master plan is the authority of the planning board. Section 3-5B2 of the charter, powers and duties of the planning board. Master plan belongs to the planning board. Town website under Master Plan Implementation Committee. The Master Plan Implementation Committee is an advisory body functioning as a subcommittee of the planning board. So it would seem to me that the master plan, which would be paid for by the Kendall Fund, which is under the jurisdiction of the planning board, I just want to make sure that the town administrator's large increase under expenses is not for any type of consulting work for a master plan.
Mr. Johnson?
Hi, thank you. So the total amount requested for the, we actually bid it out, and the total amount awarded for the bid was $126,000. The town was fortunate to receive a $50,000 grant as part of the Community Compact Grant through the state. The remaining balance will be paid through the Kendall Fund.
So, Mr. Moderator, is that money in the expenses of the town administrator's budget? Does that relate to the to the master plan?
No, it does not. I just outlined the funding sources for that.
Okay, so maybe you want to, through you, Mr. Moderator, maybe the town administrator would like to explain the large increase in his expenses?
Sure. There's about a $40,000 increase there, and that is to participate in an intermunicipal agreement with the town of Norwood and Sharon to fund a green energies manager. The town was recently accepted as part of the green communities that the state's recently sponsored. I believe there's about 200-300 other towns who have joined that. Walpole's one of the handful of other towns who have not. So we recently were joined to that, and that's going to contribute to that. That person's going to monitor our compliance with that and ensure that we continue to be a green community.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. I was just overly concerned that I didn't want to I want to make sure that the planning board's authority was still intact and that the select board would respect that authority. Thank you.
I take it you release your hold, Mr. Moraski? A simple waive is good, thank you. Okay, Ms. Higian, Public Safety, Police Department. Mr. O'Leary, I apologize. Town Accountant? Mr. Hassenjager, we have people that put a hold on articles. Could you? No, Mr. Hassenjager, as I said, you had to put a hold on a specific line item to speak. Okay, so if you want to take your seat for a moment, I will actually make an exception for you on this case, but let Mr. O'Leary, who placed a hold. Is it on general government, Mr. Hassenjager? Okay, wait for Mr. O'Leary and then I'll bring you up.
John O'Leary, Precinct 3. My question on town accountant relates to the personnel services line. Can someone explain the relatively large increase?
Mr. Johnson?
Sure. I note that recently Marilyn Thompson, our longtime finance director, retired. Jody Cuneo, who's the town accountant, is also functioning as the finance director. And I'd note that there's a decrease in the treasurer tax collector's budget, so we more or less swapped that there.
Okay, I thought that might be the case. Thank you for clearing it up.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Do you release your hold, Mr. O'Leary? Thank you. Thanks, Liz. Mr. Hassenjager, could you please state which line item you're specifically requesting to discuss?
Well, the question is about 01182, Community and Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Hasenjager. Proceed.
I'm curious if what Mr. Nomorowski was referring to was a $58,000 item in planning, and wondering about the study that was possibly should have been come under that budget. But I'm wondering if there's any involvement with community and economic development, that figure, that 147,000, with the study that Ms. Moraski was discussing. Is any of those funds?
Mr. Johnson?
Are you referring to the master plan?
Yeah,
No, it's not. It's not in this line.
so master plan items. Could you just explain the breakout of the 147,000, Mr. Johnson, please?
Mr. Johnson?
So the salary for the two positions in that department is total just about, for FY '22, the request is 148,000, and the total amount for expenses is 2,250. What specifically are you looking for, Mr. Hasenjager?
I'm wondering if there's a plan to have three people in that department, essentially a planner, a community development director, and a clerical.
As part of this budget, no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hasenjager. Ms. Hagian, thank you for deferring to Mr. Hasenjager. He appreciates it as well.
Thank you. Megan Ahagian, Precinct 1. I just wanted to briefly mention that while we're looking at finding money to make some big investments in the schools, I've been looking at other places where we could possibly save, and the police department budget jumps out at me, being the next largest one after the schools, and the fact that it's increased around 20% in the last 3 years, and crime in town is actually down, and it's my understanding that the main pressure on the police department at this time is drug-related incidents and mental health incidents, and I would really appreciate it if our town leadership would look at some alternative ways of meeting that need in the community. We've seen a number of other communities throughout the country try alternative programs involving sending social workers as first responders, and not only does that meet the needs of the community many times better than sending a sworn officer, it also results in significant cost savings. So I'd love for us to explore some alternatives there. Happy to do some research and some legwork, but I did want to propose that idea, as I know we're stretched budget-wise. Thank you.
Do you release your hold, Ms. Hagian?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, Ms. Hagian. Mr. O'Leary?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, could someone explain the increases in both the salary schedule and the expenses for the police department? What's generating the increase? I believe there is one additional officer, but that seemed
Mr.
more
Trudell?
an increase than that.
Yeah, through the town administrator's address and the chief's presentation, late this year, we've upgraded the administrative team so that there is now more balance across the top leadership. There was actually a void in basically the lieutenants and deputies level, so there wasn't adequate supervision on all shifts, and they filled that position. So now we're going forward for a full year with an additional administrative level person, and there were actually 2 police officers being added to this year's budget. One position, I believe, is already filled, and the other one is going to be filled shortly.
Was the administrative level position a promotion, or was that hired from outside?
I'm not sure how it was filled, but the position was created, and if he was promoted, there was a vacancy that still needs to get taken care of on the patrol side also.
And on the expenses?
A majority of that is through the hiring process and getting the officers outfitted and trained. and I'll defer to the chief on any additional questions.
So is it the case then that the town provides a large portion then of the office's equipment? Is that standard procedure then?
Chief?
Good morning. I apologize. I couldn't hear all of that, but I believe we're on the expense side right now.
That is correct.
Most of the increases on the expense side have to do with the one new officer that we have in the next budget. That officer wouldn't start until probably October, November timeframe. Some of the other expenses that we have are to pay for that officer to go through, so the academy equipment, that usually runs up around $10,000. And that includes the tuition for the police academy. Some of the other expenses that we haven't had in the past include, once Norwood Hospital closed down, we kind of were able to, like when we ran out of Narcan, or we used Narcan at an overdose, we would just be able to go over there and exchange it, and they would give us basically free Narcan for several years. Now that the hospital's gone, we have to make those purchases ourselves. Other purchases include the EpiPen, which we were trained in this past year, and we implemented those into the cruiser. So there's a couple of new things in there that bumped it up a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Do you release your hold, Mr. O'Leary?
I do.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. And now on to animal control.
It looks like everything's gone from salary into expenses. Could someone explain that, please?
Mr. Trudell?
Our longtime animal control officer has retired, and the town started reaching out to other communities to do a sharing, and the town has entered into a preliminary agreement with Norwood so that we will pay them a flat amount, and we will use their animal control officer going forward, and they'll handle all the benefits and other administrative costs.
So does the savings in the administrative cost help offset the increase in the budget then?
Mr. Trudell?
I believe so. When you look at the entire package of benefits and everything else, what we're paying Norwood is becomes a savings to us in other categories.
Mr. Johnson, did you have more?
Yeah, I just want to add, over the last 10, 20 years, John's done an excellent job. We've got a heck of a bargain with him. Just in the last few years, we paid him $49,000, $50,000, $51,000, and $52,000 a year to be available 24/7, 365. So I approached the town of Norwood. We're going to work with them on an intermunicipal agreement, which is going to continue to provide 24/7 coverage, 365. They're going to keep their current animal control officer, hire a deputy. We won't be responsible for the health insurance benefits that come along with that, which is about a $22,000 a year savings. We also won't be responsible for the OPEB liability there and any other benefits that we'll have to deal with. So yes, it does look like a $30,000 bump, but long-term, John's been doing a great job, and the town's been getting a real bargain at that, so that's why we're here.
Thank you. I release my hold.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. On to public education. We had Mr. Damish for Tri-County Vocational and Mr. O'Leary on the same. Yeah, but Damish was first. Just a note, Dan Haynes from Tri-County is here, so I may call on him depending on your questions as well.
Bob Damish, Precinct 7, and I just want to make sure people realize that the cost to Walpole for Tri-County went up $339,000, which is an increase of about 32%. At FinCom the other night, I found out the reason is because the student population from Walpole has almost doubled from 42 to 82. Just want to first confirm through you, Mr. Moderator, that number is accurate.
Mr. Johnson?
So it's gone, in FY18, it was 42 students. 20, which is last year, it was 62, and it's gone up to 82. So over the last year, it's increased by 20.
Oh, okay, thank you, Mr. Johnson. So just kind of a general question, and maybe the representative from Tri-County could answer this, but why do we think that number is increasing? Increasingly, students from Walpole are going to Tri-County, And I'm not knocking Tri-County. I think it's great that the students in Walpole have the choice of agricultural school, the Walpole Great School, Walpole School Systems, and Tri-County. I'm just curious if there's any demographic reasoning as to why more kids are going there.
I'm not sure we're really to go to answer that question, but I'm going to ask Mr. Hayes just to come up and speak briefly on Tri-County. Hopefully he may answer your question, but I believe that's probably the minds of the students and their parents.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yes, a lot of the students are coming from Walpole. Walpole had the largest increase, 18 additional students this past year. And I think there's a recognition that, the vocational and the trades, it can lead to a great profession, a great living. So I think that's probably the cause of that.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes.
I release.
Thank you, Mr. Damish. Ms. McCarthy. You don't have to run, unless you're cold.
Hi, Shannon McCarthy, Precinct 4. I just wanted to ask how much funding was allocated toward reducing full-day kindergarten tuition this year, and if it's not too far out of the scope, what the plans are for that going forward.
Mr. Trudell?
Last year, when we came here, basically any tuition reductions were wiped out of their budget that we were planning to give them. And this year, it's $100,000, which is pretty much what we were going to give them last year. So we're basically getting back to where we wanted to be last.
Are you good? I know he cut out at the end.
Sorry, yeah, I missed that last part.
So basically, last year we were planning on giving them $100,000. We weren't able to give them that, and this year we did come through and give them the $100,000 they were looking for last year.
And then, is there plans for more in the future, or can we speak to that?
Mr. Frisha, is that why you're up?
The kindergarten tuition reductions is part of a 7-year plan. This year was a 25% reduction, which will drop the fee from $1,800 to $1,350 next year. So we're into, I think, about the 5th year of that plan. A few more years, we're hopeful that we'll be able to continue to reduce that fee.
Thank you, Mr. Frisha. Anything else, Ms. McCarthy?
Thank you very much. I release my hold.
Thank you, Ms. McCarthy. Mr. O'Leary, Tri-County, you release your hold. Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Mr. O'Leary on Public Works, you had a hold on the Highway Division.
John O'Leary, Precinct 3. Within the board, the Finance Committee's comments for Article 6, they reference that concerning the Public Works, that they're adding an engineering inspector and 2 new cross-functional staff to meet seasonal needs for, I assume it's supposed to be DPW, Parks and Highways. Could someone explain more about the 2 new cross-functional staff? How they seem to be used? Is this 2 more full-time people?
I got it.
Mr. Johnson?
Sure. Dan, if you're okay, this is going to address the parks hold too.
I was going to ask, is
Yeah,
this...
I believe it'll be similar,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
So Rick's been in the position for a few years now, and he's looked at it, worked with the select board on it, and really taken a hands-on approach to see how can we really cross-train a couple of different employees and bring them in under the current, what's allowed under the current contract. So what we're going forward with is the hiring of a W3 craftsman and a W1 laborer at $49,000 and about $66,000. The $66,000 is for a full year. The $49,000 is for about 3/4 of the year. So part of the year, that person's going to work in the highway when snow and ice is busy, when probably for the winter and late spring months. The other parts of the year, the two people will be working in the Parks Department to deal with the fields and anything else that might come up.
Hold on one second. I release my hold on highway. Regarding the Parks Department, since we're talking about it, could someone explain the increase in the expenses?
Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, much of that's attributed to the watering costs. As you might expect, as we discussed with the Route 1A fields, there was additional cost that is anticipated as part of that. I believe Justin Monta, the park superintendent, worked with Rick Mattson to come up with an estimate as to what it's going to cost to water those fields up there. Most of that can be attributed to that amount, and a small amount towards the downtown celebrations for the holidays.
I'll release my hold on parks also then.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. That completes the holds on the budget. Any other questions or comments with regards to Article 6? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your green card and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red cards and say no. It is a favorable vote. Motion is passed. Article 8, the fiscal year 2020 water budget. It is regularly moved and seconded that the following sums be appropriated to the Water Enterprise Fund and expended under the direction of the Department of Public Works for the purpose of operating the Water Department in fiscal year 2022. Personnel services, $1,023,862. Expenses, $1,653,630. Debt service, $1,801,777. And that the sum of $4,479,269 be raised as follows. User fees, $3,751,754. Retained earnings, $200,000. Miscellaneous receipts and the MW PAT, $527,515. This is a petition of the Sewer and Water Commissioners. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action 12-01.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Barrett, Board of Selectmen.
The Select Board voted favorable action 3-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. And Mr. Abbott, the Sewer and Water. Favorable action 3-1-1. Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Any questions or comments with regards to Article 8? Mr. O'Leary?
One brief comment on Articles 8 and 10. I'd like to thank someone so that the totals actually agree on the sheets handed out for a change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Any other questions or comments with regards to Article 8? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your green cards and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no. It is a unanimous vote in favor. Article 9, this is the fiscal year 2021 sewer budget. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from sewer retained earnings account the sum of $200,000 for the purpose of supplementing the fiscal year 21 sewer budget. This is a petition of the Sewer and Water Commissioners. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action 12-01.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Barrett, the Select Board vote.
The Select Board voted favorable action 500.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. And Mr. Abbott, sewer and water? Favorable action 301. Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Any questions or comments with regards to Article 9? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your green cards and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red cards and say no. It is a unanimous favorable vote. Thank you. Article 10, the fiscal year 2022 sewer budget. Fiscal year 2020, it is regularly moved and seconded that the following sums be appropriated to the sewer enterprise fund and expended in the direction of the Department of Public Works for the purpose of operating the sewer department in fiscal year 2022. Personnel services, $308,182. Expenses, $4,526,710. Debt service, $43,700, and that the sum of $4,878,592 be raised as follows. User fees, $4,388,351. Retained earnings, $200,000, and miscellaneous receipts, $290,241. This is a petition of the Sewer and Water Commissioners. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action 1301.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Barrett, Select Board vote.
The Select Board voted favorable action 300.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Abbott, Sewer and Water. Favorable action 311. Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Are there any questions or comments with regard to Article 9? Article 10. Typo, thank you. There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your green cards and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red cards and say no. It is a unanimous favorable vote. Thank you. Article 12, this is the appropriation to the stabilization fund. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $175,000 for the purpose of supplementing the stabilization fund as authorized by Chapter 40, Section 5B of the Mass General Laws. It's a petition of the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action 1310.
Trudell. Mr. Barrett, the Select Board vote.
Select Board voted favorable action 500.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Any questions or comments with regards to Article 12? There being none, this article requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your green cards and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no. It is a unanimous favorable vote. Okay, I've got a problem here. Doubled up on 12 there, folks. Apologies. Article 13, a petition of the Board of Selectmen, appropriation to the OPEB fund. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $287,000 for the purpose of supplementing the fund known as the Other Post-Employment Benefits Liability Trust Fund, or OPEB, as authorized by Chapter 32B, Section 20 of the Massachusetts General Laws. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action 10-4-0.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett, Board of Selectmen.
Select Board voted favorable action 500.
Thank you, Mr. Questions or comments with regard to Article 13? Yes, sir.
Mr. Moderator, Sean McCauley, Precinct 2. I noticed that it was 10 to 4. Is anybody available to speak to the 4 and what the complaint was? My issue isn't with OPED, it's that maybe there's not enough money being put into it.
Sure thing.
If somebody could comment on that, please.
Mr. Trudell?
Yeah, I actually was one of the 4. We hope to put more into the stabilization fund and OPEB at this time. But we looked at what the police need, what the fire department needed, and then we had to scale back a little. So originally we voted anticipating putting more in.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Mr. Trudell. Any other questions or comments with regards to Article 13? There being none, this motion requires a majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your green card and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no. It is a favorable vote. Article 15, Walpole Media Corp. Fiscal Year 2022 operating budget. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town, pursuant to general laws, Section 53 F and 3/4, transfer from the PEG access and cable related fund to the sum of $600,565.13 and appropriate the same as a grant to the Walpole Corporation to operate the Walpole cable access and PEG channels for 2022. And further, to authorize the Board of Selectmen to execute a grant agreement with said corporation upon such terms and conditions as the board deems appropriate. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action 14-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Barrett, Board of Selectmen.
The Select Board voted favorable action 401.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Any other questions or comments with regards to Article 15? Yes.
Hi, Jill Takis, Precinct 4. Just a comment and a heartfelt thank you to Walpole Media. When we were in lockdown, I'm a member of UCW, United Church of Walpole. We had many members that did not have access to a computer, so they could not watch our services online. And we connected with them, and they quickly put up our services on Walpole Media, and we really appreciate it. It has been a lifeline for some of our church family members, so thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your green cards and say aye. All opposed, please raise your red card and say no. It is a unanimous vote in favor. Article 16. Deke Sheeter, please work your way down. Oh, come on down. This is a citizen's petition to eliminate the use of single-use plastic bags. It is a citizen's petition. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to amend the Walpole general bylaws as set forth in the warrant under Article 16. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action 10-4-0.
Mr. Barrett, the Select Board vote.
Select Board voted favorable action 410.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. And we have a presentation by Deekshita, the primary sponsor of the article.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good morning. There we go. Good morning, everyone. My name is Deekshita, and I have lived in Walpole for almost my entire life, which is why I'm incredibly excited to talk to you today about Article 16, which has been drafted with support from members of Walpole Green, Walpole's Recycling Committee, Walpole Peace and Justice, Keep Walpole Beautiful, and Stephen and Autumn from Walpole High's Green Team. The goal of Article 16 is to help protect the environment in our town and preserve the health and general well-being of our community. The article proposes a bylaw that would phase out the distribution of thin film single-use plastic checkout bags in our town and promote the use of reusable bags instead. This does not affect dry cleaner bags or bags that we use for produce, meat, newspapers, pet waste, and there are a few other exceptions. Large businesses would have 6 months and small businesses would have 1 year to phase out their use, with an additional 6 months for hardship as a hardship waiver, and longer if the pandemic persists. Now, there are 141 cities and towns in Massachusetts that all regulate plastic bags, including several in our area like Medfield, Sharon, Canton, Medway, Millis, Wrentham, Dover, and Dedham. We spoke to the Board of Health in 6 of these towns, and all said that there was essentially no cost to enforcement, they didn't require any additional personnel, and there hasn't been any pushback from businesses or the public. Now, we had conversations with 60 businesses in Walpole that distribute checkout bags, and we found that 90% either never use plastic bags, rarely use them, or are part of a chain, so changing to paper would not pose a problem. The remaining 10% raised the concern that paper would cost a bit more, but they understood the impact on the environment and would not object. Our research did not show that a plastic bag ban causes hardship to businesses in towns that have already enacted similar regulations. And a few studies have shown actually that in the long term, businesses saved money because they no longer needed to buy as many bags and they could charge money for the bags that they do distribute. So why phase out plastic bags? Well, when you burn plastic, it releases known carcinogens into the environment, like dioxins and furans, and most of the trash in Walpole gets burned in a waste-to-energy facility in Millbury, and though they do a fantastic job of filtering out most of these toxic emissions, no system can reach 100%, and even 1% of those emissions leaking into the air is not a good thing. Now, plastic bags that don't end up in the trash or recycling end up as litter, and plastic that sits outside as litter breaks down into microplastics, which are nearly impossible to get rid of. They stick around in the environment for thousands of years, and they also pose health risks. So it's well known that there are no good ways to get rid of plastics, and it's why there's such an emphasis on reusing and recycling them. But the problem is that single-use plastic bags, unlike other plastic consumer products, are incredibly difficult to recycle. They're not accepted in residential recycling programs, so if you want to recycle plastic bags, you've got to drop them off at a curbside plastic bag collection facility like the one that we have at Stop and Shop. But these centers are actually known to have extremely low recycling rates, and more than 90% of those bags end up in the trash anyways because of contamination. Now, a common question is, are paper bags worse for the environment than plastic bags? The answer to this question is actually overall no. In 2011, a single UK study concluded that the emissions of a paper bag or reusable cotton bag are more than that of a single-use plastic bag. Now, this is true, but it overlooks several key points. So the first is that the study does not include the benefits of composting, which is not possible with plastic bags. It automatically assumes that plastic bags are reused a second time, but doesn't assume this for other bags. It fails to account for the fact that emissions from plastic bags are far more toxic than those from paper and cotton, and the study does not account for the impact of litter, which can harm and even kill wildlife. Now, plastic bags are arguably worse than other plastics because they are more prone to becoming litter. So they are light, so they can travel really long distances, and because they're so thin, they degrade into microplastics quickly, so they contaminate our environment even faster. Now, please note that this bylaw is not a reprimand on all plastics, many of which can be recycled properly and are incredibly useful. This is specifically addressing the issue of thin film single-use plastic bags for which there are no suitable alternatives, for which we do have suitable alternatives, and for which the benefits simply do not outweigh the costs. So in summary, Article 16 proposes a bylaw to phase out the use of thin film, single-use plastic checkout bags, and it ultimately has the goal of making Walpole more environmentally friendly, preserving the health of our community, and protecting our beautiful town. Thank you.
Any questions or comments with regards to Article 16? Yep. Mhm. Just stand in front of the microphone. You don't need
Okay.
to touch it.
No, I just wanted to look at people instead of.
Yeah, I know, but you know what? Excuse me, you're on camera.
Oh,
So
okay.
smile for all the people at home watching.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Okay, my name's Jane Bergen. I'm an RTM in Precinct 3 and also a member of Walpole Green. I'd like to thank Dikshita and her team, Walpole High School Green team. We have someone here, Stephen Bond, who's come down today. They've spent hundreds of hours researching this issue to make Walpole a cleaner and healthier place. Dikshita did all this while an undergrad at MIT, and as she's now pursuing a master's degree there. Through meetings with RTMs, town boards, businesses, and citizens, I've learned a lot about this issue and wholeheartedly support it. Passage of this article has not been a problem for the 141 cities and towns that have passed it, or for the businesses in them. Voting for Article 16 is one way we as individuals can address some of the environmental concerns affecting our town, our state, our country, and the world. Does Walpole want to be a green town? I think it does. Is this the total answer? Of course not. But it is an important step along the way. Will it be sometimes inconvenient when we have to go back to our car to retrieve a forgotten reusable bag? Yes. But that is a small inconvenience compared to what we gain by less litter, cleaner air, more protection for our wildlife, reduced use of our petroleum reserves, and a better future for our children and grandchildren. Walpole Green has purchased 200 reusable bags and will buy more if the need is there to give out free at town events, the senior center, farmers market, or other places anyone is in need of one. I do have a few here today if there's anybody here in need. Please join Walpole Recycling Committee, Walpole Green, Keep Walpole Beautiful, Action Together, and Walpole Peace and Justice in supporting this article. Join me in voting yes on Article 16. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bergen.
Robert O'Leary, Precinct 3. Just a comment through you, Mr. Moderator. I'm all for banning plastics and reducing them as much as possible. What I have a problem with is enforcing it. This is ultimately a people issue and rather than a business issue. So it's the people that are going to change it rather than the businesses. So I don't think we need to enforce it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Mr. Hasenjager.
Hasenjager, Precinct 1. Two things. The same group, Woke Green, whatever all the titles are, Peace and Justice, they sponsored a similar environmental article at the last town meeting requiring mandatory stretch energy code. After that town meeting, I got a call from Harvard University commending me for speaking against that article. They have what they call a sick housing or sick home program, and this is the same
Excuse me,
type of
Mr.
thing.
Hasenjager. Yes, Ms. Lawson, please go to the microphone and state your point of order.
Lawson, Precinct 2. I'd like the speaker to stick to the article in front of us rather than speaking about what's happened in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Lawson.
you.
Mr. Hasenjager, please focus your comments
I
on the
will. I'm
article. Thank
talking
you.
about emissions in the environment as well as into a home. But the point's been made. The first thing is who's going to enforce this, what the cost of enforcing such a thing. People should have choice. In a socialistic society, we tell everybody what to do. You can't eat beef, you can do blah, blah, blah. People can use plastic bags or not use them. It's a freedom of choice. There's no need to require this. If you're educated, you know what you want to do environmentally. The town doesn't have to have a policeman following you around, seeing what kind of bags you're using. This just keeps going, drip, drip, drip. You people don't get it. 5 years from now, you will. When you'll be in a regulatory straitjacket, you won't be able to do anything. Someone will have to tell you how to tie your shoes.
Thank you, Mr. Hasenjager. Ms. Lawson.
Lawson, Precinct 2. On the question of enforcement, I think it's quite self-evident that the way it's enforced is that when you go to the store, they won't hand you one of these bags. You'll either have your own bag or you'll carry the items out in your hands. Like many people, I'm used to now using the reusable bags for the supermarket, and I often forget to bring them into a CVS or a Walmart. So it will require some change in behavior, but I'd urge the body to think not of us. Think of your children, think of your grandchildren. What world are we leaving for them? This is a very small drop in the bucket, but it is something. And I stand and rise in favor of this, and I thank you for bringing it forward.
Thank you, Ms. Lawson. Mr. Chekarowski.
Philip Shaharofsky, Precinct 7. I am also in favor of this article, and I also want to thank Dasika and the team for putting this forward, for all the research they did. I just want to speak about three things. First, since Mr. Hasenjager brought up the issue about the stretch code, just to clarify.
Mr. Chekarowski, I'm going to stop you right there. Let's stay off the stretch code, okay?
The second thing I wanted to say is that in society, we have rules for many things. So this whole idea that we should have no rules or that the police are going to follow us, that's all very bogus. You know, this is a very sensible thing. It's good to have these types of regulations because, first of all, the stores, everyone will be aligned. It's the right thing to do, and no one's going to be following anyone around. It'll be more or less self-regulating, and it's good for all of us to have that emphasis to do the right thing. And microplastics, that's one of my big things. It's not only do we see all the plastic bags polluting our neighborhoods, our streets, but the long-term effect of plastic as it breaks down. This is really so necessary, and as I think the other speakers said, we need to do this for the good of society. So I speak in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chekarowski.
Hamilton Precinct 5. I'm not against this, but I'm against it for Walpole. If the Stop and Shop in Walpole is limited, then people will go to the Stop and Shop in Norwood or Foxborough. So I don't want to penalize the businesses in Walpole by approving this. It should be a more regional effort, not just the people and businesses in Walpole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton.
Vic Sena, Precinct 8. I rise in opposition to this 16, and I'll tell you why. All of these bags go to Wheeler Braid and Millbury, and they get burnt. Wheeler Braid and Millbury is certified by the EPA and the DEP in Massachusetts. As far as the bags being thrown away on the side of the road, have the police enforce it. It's littering. It's a $50 fine in Massachusetts. All right. I had someone tell me that they picked up 50 pounds of bags in the river the other day. There's 2,000 to 3,000 bags per pound. He must have had a 10-wheeler there to pick them up. So I don't think this is a real big problem, and I would ask everybody here to use common sense and vote this down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sena. Any other questions or comments on Article 16? Come on. Folks, you can come down and stand in line if you have, just want to keep it short. Yeah, keep the line to about 2 people if deep.
Nancy Dayan, Precinct 1. I rise in favor of this article. I'm a member of the Walpole Recycling Committee. I'm also RTM in Precinct 1, where the petitioner lives. I'm very proud of her for bringing this forward. This is a problem. It's a problem everywhere. It's time to do the right thing for ourselves, our kids, our community, our environment. It's never the wrong thing to do the right thing. Please vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dayan. Sir?
Robert Buckley, Precinct 7. I'm only speaking out of personal experience with this because I work at a grocery store. And as far as the plastic bags uses and such, like, I'm all in favor for, like, you know, using reusable bags, but the way most people usually bag them, there's always like that cross-contamination and many other issues. And it was so bad at one point that, you know, last year with the rise of COVID, we had to go back to plastic bags. And as much as like a lot of people say that they support the environment and they support like the use of single-use bags, I've also heard a lot of people say that they do want to use plastic bags and they still want to use them. So as much as like I'm all for the environment and saving, you know, a lot of stuff, as my dad would tell you through his gardens, but I have to vote no on this for the time being, only because I'm representing the people that voted me in. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Any further questions or comments? Is it a new comment, Mr. Senna? Proceed then.
I'd like everybody to know that you're standing on plastic, okay? This whole place is made out of plastic. Vote no.
Thank you, Mr. Senator. Mr. Damish.
Damish, Precinct 7, and my comment is I'm not in favor of any type of ban generally. I don't believe in over-regulation. I believe in education. I've started using the reusable bags because my wife believes in them. Now I have like 4 of them in my trunk. I go to Wegmans, and Wegmans has a sign that reminds me, did you remember your reusable bag? Yes, I did. Go back to my car and get it. What I'm getting at is, it's just one ban after another. I mean, look what happened in New York City. You couldn't get like an extra large Coke at one point. The country wants to ban menthol cigarettes. Where does it go from here? Let's educate the people. If someone's walking into CVS, maybe have a little stand and say, here's a reusable bag you could use. I mean, every time I go to CVS, they always try to give me like 5 bags, but I'm like, nope, got my own bag right here. So let's learn about this. Let people learn. I know the body here has a right to make the decision for 25,000 people, but I live right near the dollar store, and up the street from me is what I call like a transient type apartment. People come, some live there for like 1 or 2 weeks. I've talked to some of these people, and I know they walk down to that dollar store and they walk back with a couple plastic bags in their hands. They're most likely, some of these people don't even drive. They don't have cars. They most likely don't have a bag with them at all times, and those paper bags tend to rip a lot. So there's always going to be a need for this type of bag, in my opinion. And when pandemic 2.0 hits in a couple of years, and if we don't have stores of these bags to begin with, what happens then? So I'm voting no on this. Again, I'm in favor of the environment, protecting the environment. I take the approach of I'm educating myself, and I talk this up with all my family and friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Damish. Any further questions or comments with respect to Article 16? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your green card and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no. It is a favorable vote. Article 17, it's a citizen's petition to allow parking in South Walpole. And I never get the final motion. Do you have it? Huh? Okay. It is, actually, I knew that. It is regularly moved and seconded to that the town vote to amend the Walpole zoning bylaw is set forth in the warrant under Article 17. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote?
Finance Committee voted favorable action 14-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Barrett, the Select Board vote?
Select Board voted favorable action 4-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Yes, Mr. Conry, the Planning Board vote?
What? Oh, wait for the speaker. I gotta get away. The planning board, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The planning board last Thursday voted 4-0-0 in favor, and I'd like to explain why it was so late. What happened is, when you do zoning articles, it isn't just you people, it's other people that are involved, and the Mass General laws, and you have to comply to Mass General laws. If you approve something, it still goes to the Attorney General, and they have very specific guidelines on timing, on notice, and so on and so forth. We had the other article on March 18th, and this was supposed to go March 18th. What happened is, I looked at it, I found some problems. The text didn't match the map, which got corrected. It was just a matter of sliding the center point from middle of Water Street back. And also, the abutters, some reason we didn't have all the abutters. So we worked together to get it done, and we made it able to be heard on last Thursday, right before the meeting. If I hadn't got it, you guys could have voted it. Attorney General would have turned it down because of the lack of notification and because of lack of map. So that's our involvement, or at least my involvement up front, to make sure. I like to see people come here. I don't vote, you people do, but I don't want to have something come out of our board that we found an error. So I just want to make that, so the people wondering why it was so late, that's the reason. And I'll give the credit to Jack and Cindy here for getting on the stick and getting it done, because they had a little bit of rush to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conroy.
I want to thank the planning board for going through the motion, going through all the hoops to accomplish this. We appreciate that. Just a little background. For nearly 50 years, for those who are not quite familiar, the stadium opened in 1971. People in Walpole, and particularly South Walpole, have been subjected to stadium effects, including traffic jams from the football games and concerts and loud noise from the concerts, which sometimes can be heard in the center of town. Most residents of South Walpole are aware of the traffic issues during the hours before stadium events and avoid using Washington Street. However, for some who may be coming home from work, particularly during night games, are just caught at the wrong time of day, it's possible to be waiting up to an hour to make the journey down Washington Street from Common Street. The traffic causes major safety concerns for the residents. Some frustrated residents and some enterprising residents decided to take advantage of the slow-moving traffic and offer their property for parking for friends and others for a fee. This allowed those homeowners, particularly those living on or near the most heavily traveled roads, an opportunity to make a few dollars during these stadium events. It's been noted that with local residents offering parking on their property, that traffic in South Walpole is eased to some extent. Under the current town bylaw, it is illegal to allow parking for a fee on residentially zoned property. The town has notified the South Walpole residents of this. The Stadium Event Overlay District is a 1/2 mile radius from the midline of Water Street at the Walpole-Foxborough line. Applications would be under the jurisdiction of the building commissioner, and permit would be based on the number of parking spaces appropriate for the property. The proposed change in the bylaw would allow residents within the proposed Stadium Event Overlay District to submit annually an application through the building commissioner to the select board for the permit with appropriate fee
based on the number of approved parking spaces. There would be no fires or tailgating permitted. The applicant could be fined or the license revoked at any time. This article requires a 2/3 favorable vote at town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Any questions or comments with regards to Article 17? Mr. Hamilton?
Hamilton, Precinct 5. In the past, South Walpole did have cars parked for stadium events. And what I'm concerned about is there are 3 issues that I don't see addressed in this article. In the past, cars parked on the lawn of, I believe it was 55 Summer Street, the greenhouse. A water leak developed under that lawn, and it was suspected that the cars that were parking on the lawn caused that water leak. Well, the water leak was before the meter, so it was on private property, but it was leaking water that the town couldn't collect money for, and we don't want to waste water. So there needs to be an ability for the town to fix that water leak immediately. Now, second, the greenhouse filled with natural gas, and the firefighters, under great stress, ventilated that house before it exploded. The leak was in the lawn, and the article needs to address potential leaks caused by parking on lawns where a gas leak can develop. Now, the gas leak is not only a danger to the occupier of the property being parked on, but natural gas, like water, follows the least path of resistance. So it can go into a neighbor's house, it can go anywhere. And you'll see on the news houses that blow up from a gas leak that were not gas customers. So that issue needs to be addressed, and I don't see it addressed here. And also, it didn't happen, but we should want to address in advance any cause of a leak for the sewer system. So I would like to see this article, if these issues aren't addressed, and I don't see that they are, that it be withdrawn and addressed. There are no stadium events now for critical use of this, so I would think that withdrawing it and coming back in the spring would be the best interest of the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Ms. Khatib?
Sarah Khatib, Precinct 8, and also Planning Board member. I have, so I rise in support of this article, but I have 3 questions, if you'll permit me. One is, if someone could speak to the possibility, or I guess if we were to submit an article to the Attorney General and we had changed, some capitalizations and some minor things, what are the chances that the Attorney General would return it, for procedural reasons?
Are you saying after, in its current form, you're going to change it afterwards and then submit it?
No, let's say we did a substitute motion to correct it.
There's no substitute motion in my hands right now.
I understand that.
Okay.
So
But go on. Yep.
So I want to understand, because I had wanted to propose a substitute motion just to clean it up so that our bylaw will be nice and clean, but was discouraged from doing that from fears that the Attorney General would send it back. And if they denied it, is it prohibited from bringing back for the next 2 years? Is that correct?
Okay. Town Council?
Lauren Goldberg, 3, Mr. Moderator. In my experience, making grammatical or form changes to a bylaw it has to be approved by town meeting, but it doesn't jeopardize the approval at the Attorney General's office. If a bylaw has the support of the planning board, then it can come back. It's just if it doesn't have the support of the planning board, then there's that 2-year bar.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, and then the other 2 questions, if someone could confirm that this bylaw would create an allowed by right use in the area of the overlay, and then I'd like to know the mechanism of denial
of that, and that would be both at the stage of site plan, limited site plan review, and then, you know, a project that had already been permitted, or an application that had already been permitted.
Attorney Goldberg?
Mr. Moderator, I actually would ask that that question go to the petitioner if that's
Sure thing.
acceptable.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Riley?
Okay, as far as the right, was this the question? The right to use the,
Yeah, it's the same question that I asked at planning
Yeah.
board, so I'm wondering,
well, I think
you know,
the-
Mr. Moderator, if you might request that the building
believe
commissioner.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I can ask.
Yeah.
the building inspector. I
Mr.
believe,
Mr. Crowley, are you able to assist on this? Here he comes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jim Crowley, Deputy Building Commissioner. This is an overlay zoning, so what it basically means is it's a single-family district that has criteria through the zoning on parking, the parking allowance. What you're voting on today is an overlay that's allowing for basically the right of the people living there to apply basically a limited site plan through the building department and the select board to get permission through licensing to be allowed to have stadium parking. So it's not an as of right, people just can't start parking 40, 50 cars at a house. Each individual owner will have to come through the process.
Ms. Khatib, go ahead.
So I was understanding that it's an allowed use regulated by limited site plan review. Is that not correct?
Yes, so for the areas, the Walpole South, the people are within the zone are allowed to apply for it, but they have to go through a limited site plan and the select board.
Okay, thank you. And then the mechanism of denial, either at limited site plan review or, you know, a resident that has a permit and then is revoked.
Yeah, we can approve it if they meet all the criteria, which we can do at a later date. We can have a public meeting to see what criteria wants to be added as the steps to getting approved. Again, it's like a licensing process for any local bar, tavern, restaurant. If you violate any of them, we can hit you with violation notices or revoke your license completely. Again, through any zoning article, the building department is the zoning enforcer. So if anybody's in violation, they'll have their license removed.
Okay, if I could just explain, my question is because the bylaw says that if the building commissioner doesn't approve it, limited site plan, it goes to full site plan. I don't see a mechanism to deny it at that stage.
So this is a separate zoning article. This is what at present there's two criteria for limited site plan and full site plan. That's for zoning at the moment. This is a brand new zoning article. So if it's denied by either the select board or the limited site plan, which involves building department, fire, police, conservation, water, health, DPW, water and sewer, everybody's involved in a limited site plan. If they deny it, it's denied.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Khatib. Thank you, Mr. Crowley. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Pete Drogan, Precinct 5. And I am opposed to this article because, and I can appreciate all of the structure that's trying to be added to the program, but I actually think that this is going to increase traffic in South Walpole as opposed to decrease it. And there are going to be some safety issues before and after various stadium events that I think are going to have to be dealt with as part of this plan. So I would encourage the body to vote no on this until we can get some of those details ironed out as part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Drogan.
Mr. Honorable Bernard Gobert, Precinct 5. I'd like to speak in favor of this article for a couple of reasons. Number one, as well as the petitioner, I'm very much affected by the traffic going to the game and leaving the game. And under the current system, the people just sort of nilly-willy drive in, drive out, and the process has no control. And I think what this is going to do is to stabilize the use of private parking and the use of private yards so that there's no danger to the community or to people coming or going from the game. because right now it tends to be a little chaotic on game day, and this is one great way to control it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gopa.
Erica Burden, Precinct 5. I live at Washington Street Extension. I'm an abutter, and this article will affect me immensely. I'm right in the midst of where the traffic flows during stadium events. I have a lot of neighbors that participate in the paid parking on their lots. I am in support of this article, and I am encouraging other RTMs to vote yes today. I want to be clear that people have been charging to park cars on their lots for years. That's not going to change after today. People are going to do it regardless. And I think this article will help regulate the parking. I think it's the one chance that residents in South Walpole have to make things safer. Right now, like others have mentioned, it's a big free-for-all. There's no control. There's no limit to how many cars can be parked on a lot. People do it unsafely. They try to cram as many cars in as they can. I think if this article passes, it'll give South Walpole residents more of a chance to have a say in the regulation, keep the neighborhood safer than it is now. I wouldn't be voting for this article if I thought it was going to make things worse. I actually think it's going to make things better. I've noticed that because people are allowed to park, in my opinion, it decreases the traffic in the area because people are getting out, parking the cars, getting out and walking and not continuing to go to Route 1. And again, I'm in the heart of this every event, so I know exactly what happens down there. So for those reasons, I am in favor of the article. Please vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burton. Mr. Trudell?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, getting back to the utility issues that Mr. Hamilton brought up, would the limited site plan process address those issues?
I'm trying to think. Mr. Crowley, yeah, Mr. Hickey. He's coming back now.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yes, it would. We'd have the DPW and engineering department would be part of the limited site plan, and they'll be addressing anything that we need down there, including conservation as well for any wetlands that are down there as well that will be affected in the limited site plan.
Also through you, Mr. Moderator, when it goes before the select board, would there actually be open public comments on individual petitions?
Mr. Barrett?
I believe there would be, yes, as with any of these considerations.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Ms. Sullivan?
Chandler Sullivan, Precinct 2. For those who live down near the stadium, if they don't want to take a permit out and just have their friends parked like they normally do and have a few friends park on the lawn, are they going to get fined or are they going to get in trouble? Or are they still allowed to do what they want to do since it's their property?
Mr. Crowley?
So the way the zoning parking works down in a single family district, there already is zoning that dictates how many cars you can have your house. If you're bringing family and friends there, you're only allowed a limited number of cars. But again, we'll be enforcing things. If people say it's a one-day parking, we will be doing enforcement down there. And if this seems to be a weekly thing, that's obvious. We'll look at that as we move ahead.
So I'm just trying to think, like people who live there, like for example, on Schufelt, if they're having a birthday party or they let friends park at their house right now for any football game or whatever it is, a concert, now they have to pull a permit even if they don't want to charge, or they're going to get in trouble if they have more than 3 or 4 cars on their property.
With our zoning right now, if you have 3 or 4 more cars on your property, we're complaint based. That if someone does complain that you're parking more than 3 cars there, that is a violation in Walpole right now as it stands. We don't go around enforcing that unless it's complaint based. This is a unique situation that we're trying to fix in South Walpole. That's been going on for a number of years. We've actually tracked back down violations, complaints back to 74, 75. So it's a process we're going to work through. This will be part of, again, this is just an overlay to approve the zoning. The next step after, if it gets approved, will be to sit down with the public and discuss the rules and regulations and what we're going to be enforcing, what we will not be enforcing.
Okay, I just don't want to take that ability away from people down there. I understand trying to make some extra money.
Well, what I heard is we're not changing that rule.
Okay, all right, that's
Correct?
all I care.
Correct, Mr. Moderator.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Ms. Mulligan?
Joanne Mulligan, Precinct 5. I used to live on Water Street, so I was right in the thick of it. I don't live right there now, but that was about 20 years ago, and we were parking cars. The parking situation has been bad and off and on, whether it's you're able to or not. And I feel like this bylaw is just going to, and I believe people have said this before on boards that have already voted on this unanimously, that it's validating what is already happening. It certainly is, and I believe that there are some people who are against it who are parking illegally already and collecting the parking fees, and I think this just puts a good structure around with the permitting and makes it safer for the area and the people in South Walpole. I do think that it pulls cars off the street. There's people on Washington Street and the surrounding area that can't get out of their driveway, and if they want to pull the permit and do this with the, around the right parameters, I think they should be allowed to. This is a 2/3 vote, and I really encourage everyone in this body. We spoke to tons of people in South Walpole to vote favorably on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mulligan. New comments, Ms. Burden?
Thank you again, Erica Burden, Precinct 5, Washington Street Extension. I just wanted to comment, Chandler brought up a good point. Will people be penalized if they have cars parking for free in their driveway? I spoke to the building inspector yesterday because this was a concern of mine. Again, I live right there, and I have a lot of times friends and family park in my driveway. My husband and I park our own cars in our driveway, and my concern was somebody would be banging on our door at every event thinking we're charging for parking and don't have a permit. But he reassured me this wasn't the case. It's complaint-based only, so nobody's going to be there every game checking up on houses. But if the reason I am supportive of this again is that if somebody is taking advantage of the parking, we have somebody to call and let them know that they're doing it in an illegal or unsafe way. So it's not going to affect people that want to have friends and family. But again, there is a limit at any given time of the cars that you can have parked on your property, and that's a Walpole law. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burden.
La Rosa, Precinct 8. I just want to say, it sounds like you're penalizing people for making a little money. I don't know how you're gonna, if she's saying you have friends and family parking on your lot, how are you gonna tell which is doing what? Like, you're just gonna go by the neighbor calling in that people are overdoing the parking? Because if she has, say, 6 people at her house for, I don't know, a party at the same time there's a game going on, but you're telling me that you can only park 3 or 4 cars at your house, I don't know how you're gonna separate all of it, that's all. I just feel like you're penalizing people for making money when they have to listen to all the music and have to deal with everything that's happening at the same time.
Thank you, Ms. La Rosa. Sir?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dalton, Precinct 5. My only problem is the complaint-based. That, to me, is just, will put neighbor against neighbor. I mean, it should be a little bit more proactive, should be patrolled, so that we don't have neighbors turning on to neighbors. That's the only problem I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton.
Shannon McCarthy, Precinct 5. Will the Boyden School be able to do fundraising if this passes?
Thanks, Mr. Johnson.
So what they'll have to do is work with the public schools, with Superintendent Goff and her team, and then ultimately it's going to be the select board's call because the select board technically own the property. So the PAC will have to get with the school administration, then eventually present it to the select board.
So there's potential.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McCarthy. Any further questions or comments with regards to Article 17? There being none, this motion affects a change to our zoning bylaw, so it does require a 2/3 vote. All those in favor, please raise your green card and say aye. Looks pretty strong. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no. It is a 2/3 vote. The motion has passed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I declare 2/3 vote. Gotta remember that declare word, right? Thought you were sleeping over there, so I thought. Article 18. This is a citizen's petition for a solar overlay. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to amend the Walpole zoning bylaw as set forth in the warrant under Article 18. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action, 13-1-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Barrett, the Select Board vote.
The Select Board voted favorable action 5-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Mackey.
I'm happy to speak, but I think the planning board goes before me.
Thank you. Mr. Conroy, Planning Board vote.
At the hearing on March 18th, the vote went, with everything in order, it went 4-1-0. Thank you.
Favorable, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Conroy. And thank you, Mr. Mackey.
Good afternoon, Mr. Moderator, Representative Town Meeting members. My name is Phil Mackey, and I am the first signature on the citizens petition, but the moderator and I discussed, and in full transparency, I am here as the lawyer for Ironwood Renewable Energy and Harwood Engineering. I'm also a citizen of Walpole, so we basically talked about it with the administration, and as you may or may not know, amending the zoning map has become an exercise in administrivia, which is probably a good thing, but we wanted to make sure all of our I's were dotted, all of our T's were crossed, and we felt that this was the most effective, transparent, and legal way to bring this motion in front of your body. I would also like to add that we had to ensure that our submission and the actual bylaw change, the zoning overlay map change that you're voting on today is 100% in compliance. We did not add anything to the regulations. We did not take anything from them. So the actual request that we have in front of you is simply to put the Harwood Engineering parcel into the solar overlay district. Anything beyond that, and I would like to emphasize this, requires site plan approval, requires, I believe, a special permit, and because there are wetlands, will require a notice of intent with the Conservation Commission. Should you vote favorably, we have prepared and are prepared to submit significantly more detailed plans to the respective boards and go through the permitting process. However, you may have questions you want answered today. So with me is Dale Knapp, our environmental engineer, and Hamilton Carrier from Ironwood Renewables. Some of you may or may not know, Mr. Harwood Sr. recently passed, so we're leaving the family to take care of its business, but I can state unequivocally that Harwood Engineering is very much in favor of this. So into the substance itself, Harwood Engineering has been in Walpole since about 1953 when they bought their current site. Prior to that, it was a gravel pit. The whole site had been clear cut, pretty much. It is a little bit before my time, so I can't speak of personal knowledge, but if you look at the ground, it's pretty clear what happened. As you drive down South Street, it does look very similar to the stand of trees we have at the end of the field. And at the end of the project, if you drive down South Street, it will still look like the stand of trees that you have at the end of the field. I believe Mr. Damish had a question on Tuesday, and I apologize sincerely for not being able to be in attendance at the Finance Committee and answer it at that point. But as far as what is going to happen behind the stand of the trees, Harwood and Ironwood propose to use approximately 13.5 acres as part of the solar array and its varying appurtenances. Of that 13.5 acres, there is no mature forest. What there is approximately 9 acres of previously clear-cut land that is primarily scrub and invasive weeds and other species. And then the balance of that, which is, if I get my math correct here, 5.9 acres, that is still absolute unused gravel pit. So it's bare. There are probably some weeds on the dirt and gravel, but there are no mature trees, there are no plants, there's nothing environmentally worth keeping. At the end of this project, it is Ironwood's intent to have restored basically the area to a meadow. We'll use a New England conservation mix, and the idea being that the ground underneath the arrays is suitable as a habitat for small animals, pollinators, bugs, birds, etc. Basically all the flora and fauna that you want in the area. We have had a preliminary discussion with the conservation agent. There are wetlands on site towards the road, and they are basically in the area, which I keep alluding to at the end of the field is the tree stand. They're in that area, which is why we're leaving the trees alone. We're staying out of the wetlands, and we will absolutely comply with, and we believe will probably exceed any standards of the Conservation Commission. But again, we are at a very preliminary stage at this point, so I can't say with any specificity, and I'm sure the conservation agent would agree until we file with the Conservation Commission. They don't have comments at this point. So that, in sum, is the project. If you approve the inclusion, we will go through the filing and proper permitting process. We are going to use an existing curb cut off of South Street, so you won't see a new road plowed in. You won't see basically any effect. Harwood Engineering would like this very much as part of their strategic plan. They have been in business, again, they've actually been in business since 1949. They've been at Walpole since 1953. They want to stay here. The second generation wants to take over and continue. And this transaction with Ironwood is part of their strategic plan. So a yes vote helps an existing Walpole business. It repurposes a former gravel pit that really has no absolute value to anyone at this point. It will provide additional revenue. I am not going to speak separately on the pilot article. Basically, if you approve the overlay, I would ask your approval of the pilot program. Let me rephrase that. I would ask that you authorize Jim Johnson to negotiate a pilot program, and that way we can ensure a revenue stream for the town. So we have a win for the engineering, we have a win for Ironwood, we have a win for the town, we have a win for the environment. It's very rare I can actually say win, 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 win. Usually at some point there's a negative. I don't see one in this particular case, and I would ask very much for your support, and please vote affirmatively for both articles. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Markey. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Hamilton.
Hamilton, Precinct 5. I rise in opposition to this because this is in Area 3. It is in a recharge area for the School Meadowbrook well field. It is upstream of that well field, and it is approaching, it's not far from Area 1, which is the most sensitive of our water protection districts. And I think it is much too risky to install, maintain, and fix panels in this area because it's within our water supply, our public water supply. So I oppose this, and I hope that it is voted down at town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Any other questions or comments? There being none, this motion affects a change to our zoning bylaw, so it requires a 2/3 vote. Yes, sir. Okay. All those in favor, please raise your green cards and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no. The motion carries. I declare a 2/3 vote. Article 19. This is a citizen's petition for the solar pilot. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen or any other enabling authority to enter into one or more pilot agreements for the payments in lieu of taxes pursuant to General Law, Chapter 59, Section 38H, subsection B, with the owner of the solar photovoltaic facility to be installed on a privately owned parcel of land having an address of 455 South Street, as shown on the Town of Walpole's assessor maps as Lot 41-71. This, again, is a citizen's petition. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action, 13-1-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Barrett, the Select Board vote.
The Select Board voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Any questions or comments with regards to Article 19? Mr. O'Leary.
John O'Leary, Precinct 3. I'm not opposed to the concept of having a pilot agreement with the new organization that will run this. My objection is that we shouldn't be allowing this decision to go to the Board of Selectmen or any other board other than ourselves as RTMs. The last time we let the Board of Selectmen make a pilot program like this, the town of Walpole lost approximately $40 million with the Siemens project. I can't see allowing the Board of Selectmen to have the town lose another amount of money, although it'll likely not be the same magnitude as the Siemens project. So I recommend to the RTMs to vote no on this project and leave the decision of how much taxes or how much agreement we get in our hands and not in the hands of the selectmen, the finance committee, or the town moderator. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Mr. Johnson.
Just a point of clarification. That agreement with Siemens was a TIF, a tax incentive financing program. This is a pilot program. They're two different items.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Sir.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, Bill O'Connell, Precinct 4. I don't know if it's a question for the town administrator, but as far as projected revenue through the pilot program, do we have any preliminary estimates?
Mr. Johnson.
No, at this time we do not, Bill. What we did in the past, in 2015, that's the last time we negotiated pilot programs. We actually negotiated two, one with Bird Machine for a 4.75 megawatt facility, which totaled $1,177,570, and then one with Bird Landfill located off Renmar, a 2.35 megawatt facility that brought in $889,893. So with cost of inflation in the last 6 years, I really have to see what their proposal is. Attorney Mackey hasn't presented anything at all, so.
Thank you. Mr. Moderator, if I could just follow up with a quick question. So we just voted and passed the overlay district, so the zoning bylaw has, or the zoning overlay has changed. So what happens if we're not able to enter into a mutually agreeable pilot program where we just passed the overlay?
Mr. Yeah. Counsel.
Moderator, through you. The pilot program is not a revenue generating program. It's a program to allow predictability with respect to the taxes that the solar voltaic oh, sorry. It has to do with the amount of taxes over time that they will pay. The assessors have to work with the Board of Selectmen to come up with that total number, and then they even it out over that period of years. So the town will not lose money. It saves money because it allows that debate and deliberation about the cost of the finished product and the value that it has to be essentially negotiated out at the beginning. But it's not a tax loss.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. Mr. Hamilton.
Hamilton Precinct 5. My concern is I don't want to see town meeting lose any more of its responsibility to the select board. So I will oppose this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Any further questions or comments with respect to Article 19? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please raise your green card and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no. Thank you. The motion carries favorable. Article 20, this is a citizen's petition to transfer funds out of the Norfolk County Retirement System. It was regularly moved and seconded that the town take no action. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee vote was 14-0-0, no action.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Barrett, the Select Board vote.
The Select Board vote was 5-0-0, no action.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. And I have a substitute motion that was presented by Mr. Zaccaro from Precinct 3 and seconded by Mr. Damish, Precinct 7. Mr. Peeler, please come down. The substitute motion as written is he has moved to provide the Select Board with a sense of the meeting and direct the Select Board to conduct a study as to whether the town of Walpole should leave the Norfolk County Retirement System. The study committee would be comprised of one member of the Select Board, one member of the Finance Committee, 3 people appointed by the Select Board, and 3 members of the public. So this is the substitute motion. So instead of no action, it's to refer it to a study committee with that composition. So we've got you want me to repeat the composition? Sure. That would be one member of the Select Board, a member of the Finance Committee, 3 members of the people appointed by the Select Board, and 3 members of the public. It is, as you'll note, an even number committee. So this is a motion for the substitute motion to be, well, it's the way it's stated, it will become the main motion. So if you refer it to the committee, it will be the main motion. So it's kind of an all-in-one. So we don't have to vote this and then vote again twice, just to be clear on that, okay? Mr. Zaccaro?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Richard Zaccaro, Precinct 3. About a month ago, Richard Peeler, the petitioner of this article, and myself spoke at length to the Finance Committee in favor of this study. And basically, the results will save the town about $3 million in excess earnings if they started their own retirement system and then joined the state system as opposed to Norfolk County. Over the last 35 years, the savings are tenfold that, not even including compounded interest. So the more money you make on your investment returns, the less money you need in appropriations, which translate in less tax dollars by the people of this town. There are 104 retirement systems in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Billions of dollars at stake here, and out of that 104 retirement systems, 90% of the retirement systems are involved either as a purchasing system or participating system in the state retirement system. They control billions of dollars of state retirement system. It's more cost effective and more sophisticated. So this is a win-win situation all around. I strongly recommend that the town undertake a study getting a further detail of the benefits of this. I thank you for your time, and the petitioner, Richard Peeler, is also here, and he did a fantastic job presenting to the Finance Committee, and he has a detailed chart that shows all the information. I encourage everyone to look at it, and particularly pay attention to the Pioneer Institute's article on why local retirement systems should join the state retirement system. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Zaccaro. Mr. Zaccaro is a little taken aback. Mr. Peeler, you're the petitioner that's making the petitioner comments, right? So please come up. I'm going to give you your 5 minutes, but since he spoke first, he technically should have been the 5 minute, but I'm sure that was, but just come on up because I know you're the petitioner. Just want to clear that for folks looking at the 3 minute mark. So this was talking to me before. I probably should have called Mr. Peeler first.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, to the RTMs assembled here today, I'm going to keep this very, very brief, particularly since our presentation to FinCom was included in the packets that you received. And I would hope that you would take some time to look at that. And as Mr. Zaccaro mentioned, there are additional backup articles from the Pioneer Institute and other sources that really gets into the details. I don't want to repeat what Mr. Zaccaro said. I think he took my notes of what I was going to say, and he used them in his own comments. In just the last 10 years, had Walpole been in the state system versus the Norfolk County system, it would have earned an additional in excess of $3.1 million. And again, that is without compounding. The number would be considerably higher than the $3.1 million. The funding of Walpole's current and future retirees pension fund comes from 3 sources: employer contributions, employee contributions, and investment income. When there is lower investment returns, it requires increased funding. When investment earnings underperform, the taxpayers have to make up the difference. In FinCom's April 5th letter to the citizens of Walpole, they stated the potential savings to the town is significant. They go on to say, the key issue leading to our vote of no action is that there is no mechanism under Massachusetts law for a town to leave their current retirement system to join the state system. However, there is a mechanism, but it would require a process. And that is the reason why we have presented a substitute motion. It is achievable, but it will take some time and some further analysis. And that is the reason why we submitted the substitute motion. I would like to take this opportunity to point out that the Walpole Townhouse, commonly referred to as Old Town Hall, is in serious need of significant repairs. When I served as chairman of the Old Town Hall Reuse Committee,
Mr. Peeler,
Mr.
Peeler,
this has.
Okay, I'm gonna give you a little latitude on this, but
I have 2 more sentences, 3 sentences. I'm almost done.
yeah, well, but it's not related to the article in my estimation. But continue.
It does, in the sense that we have a building, the landmark in this town, that needs significant repairs. And when I was chair of the Old Town Hall Reuse Committee, we looked at ways in which we could put that building into good use as it was intended, without having to go to the taxpayers.
Mr. Peeler, tie it back in right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And so, in looking at the investment dollars that the town did not realize by being in the county system, projects like Old Town Hall could have been resolved. And with that, my comments are complete. I urge the members of town meeting to support the substitute motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pila. Mr. Hamilton?
Hamilton Precinct 5. I support this, and my reason is a little different. I feel that it's much safer to have the Walpole retirement system at the state than at the Norfolk County. Thank you.
Mr. Trudell?
Actually, I'm in favor of the substitute motion, but a little bit more background on the original petition. Walpole cannot join the state pension retirement plan. That is for state employees. What we can do is we can, through this study, we'll be able to determine, can we leave Norfolk County and establish our own and invest in the exact same things that the state invests in. The state has basically a giant mutual fund that the county and other municipalities are allowed to invest in. So we can invest in the same things as the state, but we will be responsible for running our own pension plan and doing the day-to-day administration. And my one question is on the composition of the committee. Select Board is going to appoint 3, but then there are 3 from the public. How are the 3 from the public going to be determined?
Yeah, I'm just making a note, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Zaccaro, did you have something specific on it, or are you comfortable with the article as it's written, the motion? Because right now, I would say, in my estimation, town council, please confirm, is that the select board would determine the members of the public. I don't believe it's covered in the charter.
Mr. Moderator, I agree with that.
Thank you. Mr. Buckley?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, Buckley, Precinct 7. I'd like to be against this, frankly, but I rise tentatively supporting it if the petitioners, with their substitute motion before us, would entertain a friendly amendment to add literally any representation of someone, the people who work for the community on this study commission. I'm very concerned that we're talking a great deal about our retirees, those people who have contributed their lives to our community and to the service of the community. Yet on the proposed study commission we have before us, there is no representative from the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, State Council 93, Walpole's Local 1957, and that represents our town hall clerical, DPW, library employees, cafeteria workers, school secretaries, teachers' aides, and our custodians in the schools, or the International Union of Police Associations, Walpole Local 115 of the Massachusetts Coalition Police, and the Local 446 dispatchers. I think I'm concerned that this article, through its various iterations, has kind of not been ready for prime time in all of its iterations before us, but I'm open to the idea of studying it, but I think we need to have representation of the people who are paying into this pension system as well, and I think that's a very reasonable and prudent addition, and if the petitioners would like to do that, I'd be willing to support it in that way, but if not, I don't think, and I would urge my colleagues to, again, kick this back, and perhaps third time would be the charm.
I my response to what you said is that the 3 appointed by the select board could include that, or we could go with a friendly amendment to add 1 member to bring it to an odd number to help with the votes of that committee.
Mr. Moderator,
Yes.
if I may. I'd just like to point out that this is a sense of the meeting.
True.
As to whether it supports the concept of studying withdrawal of the town's funds from the Norfolk County retirement system. And so certainly, I know that the selectman chair is here today and can hear what people are talking about, but the board could certainly choose to include other people on that study committee, or to figure out some other way to study it that would include the input of the people that are needed.
Excellent point. Can we just confer for 1 moment, please? Thank you. 1 sec, Mr. Buckley.
Take your time.
Okay, as it's a sense of the meeting, because, and that comes from the article itself, and that it doesn't meet it can't be done without legislation, as we know.
Understood.
So
yes.
if you're, I'm gonna leave it at that, because I haven't heard any response from that. It is a sense of the meeting, and it does appear that these are guidelines to work within. And I think, as you said, you've got the select board chair here, and you've got other members in the
Okay.
audience. Is that satisfactory?
I would think so. I would pose and implore upon the select board to seriously consider perhaps all three of those seats at least to the various different unions that are paying into this, millions of dollars into this, and it's really their livelihood, and I really want to hear what they have to say about this. I think they need a number of seats at the table going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Hamilton?
Mr. Hamilton?
Hamilton Precinct 5, for clarification, I worked with Town Administrator Merriam to try to do a switch from the Norfolk County to the state pension plan back in the 80s. And the towns were allowed to do that. Then they stopped allowing municipalities to do that. But my understanding is Boston, Chelsea, and now Norwood are members of the state retirement system. They are members, in my understanding, and that this proposal would transfer us from Norfolk County to an independent system and then to the state system, and the employees and retirees would be members of the state system. Am I incorrect?
Mr. Hamilton, I'm going to step back for a second, and then I'll ask town council to correct me if I'm, but the discussions that I've had and looked at is, first of all, this article of itself, as it state, it does not work. You cannot transfer the Norfolk County retirement assets to the state system.
Yes.
There has to be a home rule petition. There's a multitude of steps that need to occur, and that is why this is a sense of the meeting. This body cannot vote to do that. Okay, so that's where the sense of the meeting comes from, and that's where the study recommendation gives the opportunity to look at all the elements in order to do that, and that'll start, and that committee will look at that, and if things work out, they'll bring it to the select board, and we'll see another article on a future warrant. That would be my expectation. Town council? There you go.
No, I understand that, but my concern was the clarification of the end result of the trip from Norfolk County through whatever means necessary to the state would make the retirees and the employees of Walpole, not the teachers, they're in their own retirement system, but would make them members of the state. If that's not true, I'd like to know that.
Right now, we cannot, you cannot act that way. There has to be a home rule petition, and there'd have to be some change, because I am not aware of, the town council, I'm gonna pause there and let you speak to that.
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think all of the examples that we just heard, those are all individual communities that have their own retirement systems, and I do believe that it was actually mentioned here before that would probably be the first step. In any event, the article itself provides for a transfer of funds, and the town has no ability to do that. It's the retirement board's funds now, they're paid into there. It can be done through legislation, and it's just not in front of us today in that manner.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because the chairman of the finance committee said that only state employees can be members of the state retirement system. And I believe Boston, Chelsea, and now Norwood are members of that.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Senna. Oh, I apologize, you, sir. If the hats and the glasses and everything, I missed some of them. Apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Richard Zaccaro, Precinct 3. And I was the one that brought the substitute motion in. I agree with that gentleman that got up. I think members of the Norfolk County workforce should be selected on the committee, and I would volunteer myself to serve on the committee, and I used to run the state pension fund under Treasurer Crane back in the late 80s, and I was also the Norfolk County Retirement System consultant. So I'd be glad to volunteer my services when the committee is picked. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sakaro.
Sue Naughton, Precinct 4. I'm also a public employee of Norfolk County, and I encourage this body to vote no on the substitute motion. I think it's a waste of funds. I also caution anyone to be wary of the petitioner mentioning the Pioneer Institute, who's funded vastly by the Kochs and the Waltons, who are against public employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Naughton. Sir.
Mark Sullivan, Precinct 3. I'm also a member of the Finance Committee. So first I want to applaud Mr. Pila and Mr. Sakaro. They came forward. It kind of opened my eyes to this. But this is really complicated. And so what I'm wondering, just Mr. Moderator, if we approve this committee, does the committee have the authority to spend funds? Because as you can see, it's really complicated. These towns have joined the state, or the state has told them that they're joining because they didn't adhere to requirements of the pension system. And whether it's actually $10 million that Walpole would have made, well, then you have to run your own committee. You have to follow all these rules and regulations in doing it. So I'm not sure that that is an accurate figure or not. I'm not disputing it. But I really think the town would be well served, have a smaller committee, and you need to hire a professional. Someone that actually knows how to do all this, that can put the numbers together for Walpole and could come together in the fall and say, here's what's actually happening. Because right now, as again, I sat there in the committee, you're getting a lot of different opinions on what you can do, what you can't do, and I really think the town would be well served to hire a professional that could tell the town. And so I'm just wondering, would the town be authorized to spend funds to hire a professional that could tell us?
Again, under this article, there is no appropriation, transfer, or borrowing language. So the answer to that is no.
So you're going to have a committee of people well-meaning, well-suited, but not professionals in looking at this thing and being able to really pull an answer together for us.
I'm going to answer your question in that there's no funding other than the article. To your point, that would be the committee's responsibility to determine how to proceed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Ms. McCarthy?
Shannon McCarthy, Precinct 4. To follow up on Mr. Sullivan's question, so if the committee then determines next step, would it eventually have to come back in front of town meeting for funding to get attached?
Yes. There would have to be additional, so that committee is going to have to make their recommendation, how to proceed, and if it and they'll bring that through to the select board, and then the expectation is we'll have a report, or we will have an article back in a future warrant. Town council, any additions or corrections?
No, there's no appropriation here. So, I think one of the things we've been talking about, I think we started talking about it just when we opened this article, is that the way this has been presented, it can't be done. So that committee, I guess, would be formed for the purpose of looking at, is it a good idea? And if so, how would that happen? And if they need funding, they would recommend the same to the select board. That would then be able to bring that before town meeting.
I think the question maybe you're asking is that, does this do anything other than it's a sense of the meeting? Nothing happens as a result of this. If you vote for the substitute motion, you're just voting for a study to look at this more and come back to this body.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
And then could I ask that you read the substitute motion one more time? I'm visual and I usually like to have it in front of me.
I will absolutely read it again. It is moved to provide the select board with a sense of the meeting and direct the select board to conduct a study as to whether the town of Walpole should leave the Norfolk County retirement system. The study committee would be comprised of one member of the select board, 1 member of the Finance Committee, 3 people appointed by the Select Board, and 3 members of the public.
Got it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Mr. Brown.
Tom Brown, Precinct 6. This is just a study, and I believe that the outcome will benefit the retirees and the citizens of Walpole moving forward. And if we are able to invest in the proven successful investments that the state does, I think our retirees will benefit from this motion. So I'm going to vote yes on that, and I would urge everybody else to vote yes as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Flowers.
Andrew Flowers, Precinct 4. Move the question.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. Mr. Flowers has moved the question. That requires a 2/3 vote? 2/3 vote. All those in favor, please raise your green card and say aye. All those opposed to moving the question, please raise your red card and say no. It is a 2/3 vote. I declare a 2/3 vote to move the question. So we will now go to a vote. This requires a simple majority vote. And just to be clear, we are voting to refer this to a study, and that will become the main motion. This is not just a no action, so it's not 2 votes. It's 1 vote that this is becoming the motion to refer to a study. Okay? Does anybody want me to read it again? We're good. Okay. All those in favor, please raise your green cards and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your red card and say no. It is a majority vote in favor of the study. Folks, that is it, and it is 12:58 p.m. So whoever, and you know what, I said 1 o'clock was the over-under, so I beat it by 2 minutes. So thank you for your time. I need a motion to dissolve. Mr. Trudell, seconded. Right here, thank you, sir. You know, Lombardi, Mr. Lombardi, thank you, I was grabbing it here. Okay, so we have all those in favor of dissolving the meeting, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? It is a unanimous vote. Thanks, folks. We'll see you in the fall.